Does Indiana have some of that 2020 magic in store for 2022? Let's take a look at the Hoosiers. Before we get into our final preview, Indiana, just a reminder, hit subscribe, ring the bell to stay notified. This is a Big Ten centric channel. This is the place to be. You're going to want to hit subscribe and know exactly when we're uploading videos, live streams, and the like. All right, we saved the worst for last. I'm not too optimistic about Indiana football. So, a couple of things to keep in mind that were a little bit odd this spring for Tom Allen and the Hoosiers. Closed spring practice to the media and no spring game. What are you hiding, Tom Allen? No, just a little bit weird. I'm sure they're installing a lot of new stuff and they don't want a lot of distractions. Here's the deal. They were very injury-riddled at quarterback a year ago. Michael Penix, of course, the darling of 2020, not so much. Now he transferred, and I think he's at Washington now. Jack Tuttle was injured. So they threw in Donovan McCullough, who's a four-star quarterback recruit, and he's playing wide receiver this year. So that's how that went. A 2-10 season last year for the Hoosiers. Now Donovan McCullough, 6'5", obviously he's got some speed if he's playing wide receiver. Didn't really do much at quarterback, didn't provide much of excitement. Of course, the Indiana staff didn't look like they saw a lot of future for him at quarterback, so they're moving him to wide receiver. We'll see how that goes. It'll be an interesting adjustment for him, and we'll see if he can be a big target in more ways than one in that passing game. And I look at this passing game, and man, you look at that 2020 team, and now just a couple of years later, the talent level has just dropped off significantly. Peyton Hendershot, Ty Freifogel, and a lot of other guys just aren't there anymore, and they didn't build off of 2020, I think is what I can confidently say for Indiana. They have put together decent recruiting, but it hasn't really translated on the field quite yet. This is a team that coming into this season, they recruited the 5th-ranked high school class in the Big Ten and the 3rd-ranked transfer class in the Big Ten. So maybe this year they can have a reversal of fortune and things can go in their favor. If things are going to go in their favor, they got to figure it out at quarterback. Now, we're not going to hear a quarterback announcement, Tom Allen says, pretty much until the day of the game. Jack Tuttle and Missouri transfer Connor Bazelak. Now, when I look at Connor Bazelak, I see some potential here. He's not going to be in the upper half, I don't think, of Big Ten quarterbacks. But I see a guy that passed for 300 yards in a game 3 times last season. But he's got to take better care of the football. He had 2 interceptions in 4 games last year. So, I mean, he's definitely, you look at Jack Tuttle and you look at the stats that he's put up. He's been injury-riddled a little bit, but I definitely look at Connor Bazelak and I looked at Tuttle, and Connor Bazelak definitely looks like the better option. They just might be keeping that tight-lipped for now to try to get an advantage in their first game or 2. And he's surrounded himself with some weapons in the running game. Sean Shivers, the transfer from Auburn, 5'7", but he packs a punch. Very fast. Auburn used him in creative ways with jet sweeps, and they tried to get him on the field, which is a good sign for Indiana. Now, Shivers was often overlooked at Auburn. He rushed for over 1,000 yards, 8 touchdowns during his 4 years at Auburn. So you're only going to get him for a year, short period of time. Same with Josh Henderson, the North Carolina transfer. They're fine. They're good. They're not as good as nearly, half of the Big Ten at running back. This is a good league. This is a really good league from top to bottom. And you can bring in a guy and you can bring in this guy, but at some point you got to try to get on that level talent-wise. And, these guys are solid. I just don't know if really any of them can stack up as a Big Ten RB1. That's the question I have. Now, as I said, you're losing a lot of good pass catchers. I mentioned Freifogel, Hendershot, and Miles Marshall was in there as well. No returning wide receiver had more than 200 receiving yards last season. I look at DJ Matthews as a guy to really step up as the main guy. Now, got injured last year, chose to not play in 2020. You go back to 2018 and 2019, he combined for 737 yards and 3 touchdowns at Florida State. So he transferred in, and he hasn't really done that at Indiana. So can you expect this guy to break through and be a 1,000-yard wide receiver when he hasn't proved it in Bloomington? TBD. But if Indiana is going to be successful, he's going to have to do that. Otherwise, they're going to rely on Donovan. I mentioned Donovan Mccullough before. They've recruited some good 4-star freshman wide receivers. You look at Malachi Holt-Bennett. You look at Jaquez Smith. Both guys that look talented on tape, but once again, we haven't seen it. It will be probably a surprise to us if Indiana goes up and they put up good numbers, because we just haven't seen it on the field. There's no reason for me to sit here and say, yes, Indiana's going to go 4 wide and they're going to sling it for 300 yards a game. I have no basis in saying that. I have no proof that that's going to happen. That is an extremely optimistic view of Indiana football. I think the realistic view of Indiana football on the offensive side of the ball is you got a lot of average players. You're hoping your quarterback can exceed expectations. And, I mean, it's very hard to... I'm an optimistic guy. If you've been watching this channel for the last few years, you know I generally try to be positive and upbeat about teams. And I've been upbeat about Rutgers and Northwestern, and I think they all got positives. It's just hard for me to see the positives right now at Indiana, especially on the offensive side of the ball. Defense, boy, you really don't want positives. Defense is the place to be. Micah Mcfadden, huge loss. 15.5 tackles for loss last year. 6.5 sacks. He carried the defense on his own. And that's not saying much, because this defense gave up the most points in the Big Ten last year. On average, they gave up 33 points per game. Sure, they've added a transfer here and a transfer there, but you look down the list, they don't have a whole lot coming back. The transfers that they've added, I'm not sure if they're going to make a huge impact necessarily. Got some decent players in the secondary, but I don't think this defense is going to get much of a pass rush, and they don't really have an impact player in the front seven. So it's hard for me to come out and say, yeah, Indiana's going to be better defensively, because once again, I just don't see any proof that that's going to happen. What does the future hold for Tom Allen? I think if there's one coach that's really on the, obviously Scott Frost is an obvious answer, but if there's one coach that's really on the hot seat right now, it's Tom Allen. Of course, Tom Allen is all rah-rah. Of course, he's all about IU. But man, you go 2-10 a year ago, and this year doesn't look much better. Here's the thing about Indiana this year. They're going to have their young guys step up. They're going to have freshmen and sophomore really step up, because they've recruited well. What was that, a couple of years ago? I think they had a top 30, the number 30 class in the country in high school recruiting. So they've got to try, and of course I mentioned the recruiting numbers in the beginning of the video for this year. They've got to find a way very quickly, I might add, to try to translate that success that they've got on the recruiting trail and turn it into wins. I'm not sure if Tom Allen has enough time for those kids to develop. You look at a guy like Donovan Mccullough, expected to be the next quarterback of the future at Indiana, and now he's playing wide receiver. So, I don't know. Hard to be optimistic. I want to know what you guys think about Hoosier football. Are we going to see a magical turnaround? Or are we going to see more of the same? Or are we going to see a new head coach at Indiana next year? Hit subscribe for more content. That'll do it for the Big Ten previews. We got game previews, game reactions, and some potential live streams right around the bend on this channel. I'm Big Ten Ted. We'll see you in the next one.